I call this meeting of Sylvania City Council for December 19th, 2022 to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Fry?
Here.
Mr. Hanson?
Here.
Mr. Hanem?
Here.
Mr. McCann?
Here.
Mr. Richardson?
Here.
Ms. Dow?
Here.
Mrs. Westbrook?
Here.
All 7 members of City Council are present, therefore a quorum exists. We only have a few folks here tonight, but please join us in our Pledge of Allegiance. Led this meeting by Mr. Hanson. I have no additions to the agenda tonight. Mr. Fry,
Nothing, Mr. Mayor.
members of City Council. Hearing none, Mr. Sanford. We'll bypass it, and if they happen to arrive late, maybe they went to the wrong place, we'll go with them whenever they get here. All right, Mr. Schroyer, Chief Miller, Mr. Shaw, or Mrs. Brining.
Nothing, Mr. Mayor.
All right, then. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to approve the agenda. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries, and our agenda for this evening's meeting is approved. We're on to agenda item 4, approval of the council meeting minutes from 2 weeks ago on December the 5th. Mr. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move approval of the meeting minutes from the council meeting of December 5th, 2022 as submitted.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to approve those meeting minutes from December 5th as submitted. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries, and the meeting minutes are approved. We are honored this evening to have a fine new police officer with us. He just started last week. He is a graduate of Lourdes University and used to be a state highway patrol member. Chief, please take over.
Lourdes University picked him up on a basketball scholarship. So, and one interesting thing is he was in a mentor program at Lourdes University, and his mentor was Chief Rick Schnorr. So we had a lot of contact with him. We really liked Dariante and did a lot of recruiting with him. We didn't succeed at first because he did go to the State Highway Patrol. He had some good experience and learned that they're a good department, but he really felt more at home with Sylvania, so we're happy to have him back. So, any questions for Dariante or us?
Officer Stewart attended the DARE graduation with me at Maplewood late last week and was quite a hit with the kids. And he asked me a very surprising question at that meeting. I hope you don't mind me sharing this. He asked for advice how to become mayor. And I'm not threatened because I'm near the end of my career. So one piece of information I didn't think to tell you was that you cannot be an elected official in a city that you're working as a police officer in. That will not fly.
Okay,
So you got at least wait till you're retired.
right.
You live in the city of Sylvania now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, that's great. You can run here, but the paycheck's smaller, I guarantee you. Thank you for attending.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for having me.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Welcome.
you.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Okay.
I already told the officer he did not need to stay tonight, and my recommendation was don't. All right, we will pass by agenda item 6 and see if Mr. Casey arrives. I hope there wasn't too much confusion, Mr. Sanford, but we'll see. You're probably checking on him right now, I can tell. All right, so we are up to agenda item 7. Mr. Aller and Mr. Shaw requested to give you an update of progress made on the downtown transportation improvement project as we get closer here to January when we're going to have another one of our public meetings. So with that, thank you for being here, Mr. Shaw, and please take over.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to do a lion's share of the talking later on, so I'm going to probably keep my remarks brief and turn it over to our professionals back here that know what we're doing here. So what we're going to do here is give you guys kind of a temperature check and an update of where things currently stand. So we're going to kind of walk through some of the feedback and results that we got from our public comment when we asked for feedback. I'm going to walk through that just a little bit and then show you some concepts that have been developed based on that feedback that we got. So I'll turn it over. You got a couple of packets in front of you. Some of it is information with respect to how that feedback went. So you're free to kind of run through that and digest it at your leisure. But for that, I'll turn it over to Rick McGuckin and Tim Brockbrader. Rick is with the DGL group. They're leading the effort with the Main Street project, and Tim is a sub-consultant with the Edge Group on this project, as well as our Downtown Vision project as well. So with that, Rick, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. So in the packet that was handed to you, as Joe said, there's, from our September stakeholder meetings, we put a summary of comments together. I just want to, I mean, you guys can read through it, but there's a couple things that I just wanted to point out, and then we'll get into a little more detail. But from some of the questions, there was a preference over parking versus eliminating parking. Pedestrian use was a high priority. They didn't want to, parking should be second priority to the pedestrian use. At the stakeholder meeting, we provided some concepts with either like parallel parking both sides, angled parking. You'll see the parallel parking seemed to be the preference. Some of the other comments that were made was the Main Street, the corridor should be uniform from Main up to Maplewood, and then with Maplewood up to Erie. And some of the other highlighted things were the concern is to slow down the traffic. They like the mid-block crossing. They don't like stamped concrete on the sidewalk where you're actually walking because it's a little bit harder to walk on. And try to utilize equal sidewalk space on both sides of the road. Right now, sidewalk on the west side, I believe, is a little bit wider than the sidewalk on the east side. One other thing that we presented was an option of a curbed street versus a non-curbed street. And there's a summary back here where like 92% of the people commented that they like the idea of an uncurbed roadway. And just as an example of what an uncurbed roadway looks like, I've got one sheet that's colored and it's got 4 different locations: Indianapolis, Indiana, down in Texas and South Carolina, and then actually one this summer was built up in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So if you really wanted to see what a real uncurbed roadway looks like, I mean, Ann Arbor's not too far up north. So before we get into the renderings over here, there's 6 pages of some plan sheets. I just wanted to highlight a couple of the roadway technical things where the existing roadway out there has 15-foot lanes. Per ODOT and design criteria, you could reduce that lane width, and we're proposing 11-foot lanes, and that gives you a little more extra room for your sidewalk width. So that helps add that pedestrian walkway. We are showing, as the example, the uncurbed roadway. And then if you go on to page number 2 of 6, this sheet here, a couple things to point out. The existing parking lots or parking spaces along Main Street, there are 22 spaces up from Monroe up to Erie. With the layout that we're showing, we've got 46 spaces, and most of that is by adding additional parking north of Maplewood. So, and that's, again, keeping the two blocks consistent looking. We do show mid-block crossing, which is a speed table, which is a raised mid-block crossing, which also helps reduce the travel speed. If you go on to page number 3, the intersection at Maplewood and Main Street currently is a signalized intersection. When we had our traffic department look at it, the signal is not necessarily warranted, and we propose to go with a 4-way stop sign. That also helps with the slowing the traffic down. We also eliminated the dedicated turn lanes, which allows for more consistent parallel parking. And let's see, if we go on to page 4 of 6, a couple key items. We're adding a speed table or the raised crosswalk. And then if you notice at the Erie Street intersection, we propose a mini roundabout. And a mini roundabout is different than a normal roundabout. It's a little bit smaller in diameter, and the center of the roundabout would actually be all paved, so that if you do have a large truck or oversized vehicle, it's intended that they will slowly go over that center island. So, and then the last thing to point out is we're showing on Maplewood, by going with the 4-way stop sign at the intersection there, we realigned the striping on Maplewood, and we provided 8 parking spots along the north edge of the roadway there. So Tim will show that in a little bit better graphics, but I just wanted to highlight those pieces of the roadway.
Question.
Yep.
I'm sorry to ask. I'm confused about where the 4-way stops. That when you,
Yep. That's at the intersection of Main Street and Maplewood.
for some
Yep.
reason, referencing.
Yep.
The traffic signal was not warranted there. Based on the traffic count. Roundabout, we talked.
Yep. We did throw a roundabout on there, and it's just really tight to get a roundabout in there, so.
That allows you to get rid of those turn lanes because everybody's taking turns anyways.
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
All right.
Real quick
Yep.
before Rick goes, so these are gonna be the fun pictures to look at, these will be really cool graphics, there's a video to watch that rendering of driving. What I wanna caution is, this is just a snapshot in time. Don't get focused on where bump outs are, which are, figuring out that these will all be details that we worked out down the road. The idea is to say like, yeah, kind of like where we're going in this direction is like a temperature check, or we really don't like this component of it, you guys are maybe a little off track. So that's the idea of today's presentation. Move into January and we get to that meeting with our stakeholders. That'll be where we really get input from our community about where we like it. But this is where we wanted to have your feedback in front of that January. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tim.
Great, thank you. So as Rick said, they handled the traffic side, the vehicular traffic side, and we are much more focused on the pedestrian side. And we heard in that first meeting a lot of comment about a really strong pedestrian streetscape, and so that's what you'll see a lot of today. What you'll see on these plans comes out of some standards that we had actually written for downtown Columbus streetscape standards, and kind of giving some parameters about, what makes a complete streetscape. The walkability of it, being able to park and have access in and out of the sidewalk areas, some minimum design standards for sidewalks, other amenity zones, just kind of special treatment areas. And so, as Joe said, we have placeholders here. This can vary greatly still, but we wanted to kind of put this down as a baseline to get you thinking about something different. So with that, I think what I'll do is just kind of walk through this a little bit. So I'm in these first couple slides, we're just going to kind of walk through very much the same that Rick just gave you guys in plan. So Monroe Street and Main Street here, and we're just going to kind of walk through this a little bit, just so you can get your bearings about this a little bit. This is actually some snapshots from a model that we ran. We just kind of flipped it up and took some snapshots just so you could get your bearings here. So, we're looking at the intersection of Monroe and Main and looking at this kind of pedestrian friendly zone of brick crosswalks at that intersection, the bump outs you can see here, and then the parallel parking spaces in here. And one of the things you'll note as we flip through these images, we're actually showing that the pedestrian or the parallel parking spaces rather would utilize brick in that as well, really kind of further enhancing the visual character. We heard that they did not like the stamped concrete or the brick that's there now, but if you recall and you walked out there now, a lot of that brick patterning happens right up along the storefront of the building in this kind of main walkway. And so we're proposing that along the storefronts, it would be a continuous concrete walkway, and we would hold the brick out towards the edge, and you'll see how that kind of works as we walk our way through here. So, oh, that just jumped. Let's see. That's the first block. Might have to do this individually. So, that mid-block crossing was right back here, and this is kind of that second stretch of that streetscape up to Maplewood in Maine. So inside the fives kind of bump out piece here, and then we continue. You can see continuing the same kind of streetscape character through here. The one thing I will point out, and I want you to take note when we look at the video a little bit, we did identify that just as some preference and tolerance, we really like the brick in the parallel parking spaces. We did do a section that's just asphalt there, just so we can kind of see what the difference is, and you'll see the visual difference in that in a little bit. The next block up, that kind of brings us up to, this is where Element and the Art Depot are. So we've added actually a second mid-block crossing here, and kind of using this space as that nice kind of middle of the block. There's some interesting kind of gathering space that happens here out in front of Element 112, as well as the Art Depot, and on the other side of the street. And then continuing Main Street down to Erie and the roundabout here. And I believe, let's see, if I do this right. There's just an enlargement of the roundabout area then. So these are the splitter islands that come into that roundabout. And then these are actually tire aprons that kind of roll across here for larger vehicles. And so we're suggesting that maybe there's a different material in here. This is technically the backside of where vehicles would like roll the semis would roll their tires across. So we really don't want pedestrians in that zone. So we're thinking that might be a cobblestone or a paver like that. That's not really that conducive of walking, but still has a visual element to it. See. And then this gets us back to Maplewood. This is flipped, so that Main Street is running this way, and that Maplewood here. And so this gets back to where kind of creating that intersection, the four-way stop, eliminating that turn lane, and then adding some parallel parking spaces along this stretch as well, and possibly adding some streetscape along that as well. So this is that model which those renderings were built from then. This first image is starting to show, again, that character of roadway running through here, parallel parking spaces in here, the tree planters, kind of that rhythm and repetition.
That's Key Bank on the right?
Yes, correct.
Okay, you're looking north on Main Street from Monroe Street.
That's correct. We're kind of down at Monroe looking north. Thank you, Mayor. So this is kind of the area, this is the first mid-block crossing, and this is the area where that kind of parklet sits now. So we're kind of replicating that a little bit. There is a turn lane here, so allowing for that, but doing it in more of a hardscape way, and we'll see an image of that in a minute. Providing some other unique spaces. So we have two of these. This space here that's kind of a bump out and a space maybe for some creative, some art, some interchangeable, year-round kind of different spaces. There's also one down at Element, at that mid-block crossing down there, and you'll see that in a minute as well. But the one thing we really wanted to do to be able to see here difference was, you can see in this first rendering, we have the curbed stretch along here. So that is actually curbed. And then this next image says, what if we take the curb away? And this is all flush zone, so that somebody walking from the sidewalk to their car does not have to maneuver over a curb. So the bump outs still are curbed, so those would still have a 6-inch curb. We would transition back to flush on these kind of angled pieces, and so that this would all be flush. The interesting thing about the planters then, with keeping those curbed, is it does provide that secondary kind of barrier access so that you can't just drive straight through and onto the sidewalk. So that curb is there in the way of the planter islands here, as opposed to, in this example, it's almost double curb, right? It's got the curb for the sidewalk and this plus the curb for the planters. So I think that's something that we really like, this idea of this flush, and that's what we heard in some of that feedback as well. And then this next image is, this is actually at the intersection of Maplewood, looking south then, down the street. And again, you can see this first image is curbed, and then the second image eliminates that curb and makes it flush along those. So you can see the difference in that. These are a couple of snapshots then that we'll just kind of walk through real quick. This is from kind of from the south, moving north a little bit. So from the south at Monroe, looking Main Street to the north. And so you can see a little bit more realistic image. The first is kind of snapshots from a working model. These are a little bit more polished graphics, but kind of keeping this gathering space out in front of the Ace Hardware store here. You can see again how the parking spaces work. And you can see how by adding, I think, this brick element within that parallel parking zone really adds a warmth and comfort, I think, more walkability to that streetscape experience. This is the bump out then, where currently that parklet sits. And so this would be curbed, and that curbing would kind of start at that bump out here with this mid-block crossing, kind of putting a fence along here, providing some protection, some seating. The design of this can change, certainly, but the idea was providing a space for seating, socialization, gathering in that space where you already have that kind of element of the parklet. And then also providing at these mid-block crossing spaces, places for people to gather and socialize a little bit and kind of hang out and chat a little bit on either side of that. This is just kind of looking up a little bit more of a bird's eye view of that mid-block crossing. This would be a speed table, and so you can start to see that here where the curbing is higher. We would raise that table up so that this is a flush walkway across there. So you can see a different angle of that flush crosswalk across that.
And you don't have any trees shown on the west side of Monroe Main Street as it approaches for that?
West side
Side of Monroe, just showed it in a couple, you're looking at it right now, I think. There's no trees over
here.
there. Yeah.
There are some. There was a block here that we were kind of experimenting with a little bit. We put in a stone wall in there,
Okay.
took out a couple of planters. Let me see if I can step back.
That's what I saw right there. No trees on the left side.
Yeah, so in this zone, we were kind of encouraging this, continuing the overhead canopy and plane with the Tivoli or catenary lights kind of in this space. And there are some back here a little bit further. But again, that's kind of what we're just wanting to show. Like, hey, here's the idea. We're kind of thinking that this overhead, the canopy, the scale can be generated from something like that overhead
Thank you.
canopy.
That's why I asked, for your reasoning.
Yeah, yep, good. So this is looking north, again, towards, to the north, Maplewood intersection, inside the 5 over here. So this bump out here, you know, allows us to add a wall and to kind of create some protected seating area where you could do some expanded outdoor dining at this bump out location. So that's the advantage of the bump out. We kind of gain some space in here. Same thing happens over here inside the 5, kind of gaining some space on the outside. Currently their patio is up against the building, and we would like to keep this pedestrian thoroughfare on both sides, kind of running up and down, and bringing the seating, social, eating kind of spaces out away from that a little bit. Yep, so we're still suggesting that we do like that. We like that social aspect. We like energizing the streetscape with people out here, but just kind of pull it out away so that the walkway can happen continuously up against the buildings on either side. That's that view. And then this is the added mid-block crossing in front of Element 112 and the Art Depot. So adding similarly that mid-block crossing. And again, just kind of creating something unique. Again, thinking about how creative you guys are here in Sylvania and wanting to have these kind of different spaces that we've looked at these kind of tactical urbanism kind of spaces where it could be temporary, it could be yearly, somewhat seasonally, that this might change and evolve. Maybe somebody takes ownership of it. Maybe there's a design competition that goes with it. But these spaces could be kind of a fun space within that streetscape and kind of work with, you know, maybe even in this case, our depot, you know, being kind of an arts community there. So there's that one. Okay, so that's the last of those. We have a quick video that we can run through. Any questions before we jump to the video on what you saw here?
I have a couple just simple questions.
Yeah.
It all looks great. Curious about the brick area and the maintenance of that. It looks beautiful. It definitely gives that warm feel. But just curious about maintenance of brick.
Yeah, good question, especially in the roadway areas, right? So what we would look at is that brick would actually be on a concrete base, on a asphalt layer, so that it would be a heavy duty profile is kind of what we refer to it as. So we see that in downtown Toledo on Summit Street. We replaced all those sidewalk areas with brick crosswalks, and it has that same kind of heavy duty profile. So that's what we would look to do in terms of creating that profile along there.
And one more question. I like that flush curb concept. It feels like it would be very good for even ADA requirements. It would be helpful. But I also wonder about how people are clear about where their parallel parking should stop.
Yeah. Let's see. Let me go back a couple of images because we are still proposing that you would have. Let me find a good image of it. Okay. So the lane would be marked with this. The white band is actually a curb and gutter or a gutter profile, gutter pan. So that'd be a concrete gutter pan. So the parking space would still be defined by a concrete curb. What we would do is actually just drop that curb to flush along there. So there still would be a concrete curb and a white line. And we would probably do the same thing on the parking bands that indicate this between the spaces.
Tim, I've got a question, if you don't mind. One of the things I've heard from different organizations in town, and part of the reasoning why they like to have the flush curbs on there is because this part of our city gets used a lot for festivals.
Yes.
And a lot of active events where usable flat street gets well used. And I appreciate seeing these flat curb options, but then right past it we have what seem like generous amounts of sort of just green planter boxes that I think would prevent some of that usable flat space from. And I understand the idea of adding a protective barrier between the more pedestrian zone and the street zone. but I'm not sure if having large amounts of sort of ivy-filled planter boxes are gonna assist in some of those events. So I'd be a little curious about how we might be able to get a little more fine-grained in how some of that area would be treated so that it doesn't get too, single use.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, even looking in the example photos that you have here, if you look closely at where the trees are, on a number of them, I think the top left one and the bottom right one, you can see that the planter boxes are actually still flush with pavement. So even though there's a place for the trees to be, right, and there's still that soft green, the area underneath the tree has a little bit more flexibility if someone wants to use it. Because part of the nice thing about having a tree on Main Street is to have the shade and to be able to enjoy that. If we're blocking the area underneath shade, it makes it a little harder to get to enjoy that. So just other than that, that was the thing that stood out to me.
Yeah, those I think are really good questions, and you know, I think for the health of the tree, we want a bigger, which is kind of why we show these bigger planter areas, you know, just to give a good soil zone for those trees to be as healthy as they can, which the current trees don't have that. But I think we can still achieve the same silvacells, things like that we can do, and reduce the actual surface planted area and make it more usable. So yeah, yep. Okay. Other questions? Yep. I have to give this disclaimer. I told Joe I'd give this disclaimer. So you'll see, we call this, and Lindsay, you're probably familiar, we call it kind of white boxing some of the buildings that, you know, we're really focusing on the streetscape elements of this. And so you're going to see like these images that have these kind of white boxes to the storefronts. It looks pretty flat, it looks pretty plain, but at least it starts to give the scale, and we're really focusing on the streetscape. So you'll see some of that kind of white box to that, but hopefully you can focus more so on the actual streetscape. Let's see. There, we can get it to work. So yeah, so we're traveling south on Main right now. So this is the added area where we're really continuing the streetscape to the north beyond Maplewood. And so you'll, I think, really see there's not much of difference between the streetscape character up on this section versus the section to the south. Realize that truck, especially when we come up to the stop sign, he doesn't stop. I'm just going to say that. So I don't want to get it. Rick's going to get excited about this. But hopefully this gives you a flavor, kind of a bit of a real-time kind of drive-through and scale, you know, picture of what this looks like. I think it gets to that, touches on the kind of warmth of the space. Again, adding the brick in these parallel spaces, I think helps a great deal to actually warm it up and make it feel more pedestrian. This kind of takes a bit to turn around here, so I'm going to try to fast forward this. There we go. So now we're moving north from Monroe up. You can see that kind of creative space that was down there to the right. So we maintain curb cuts, and we open those up so that you can still access into, obviously, parking lots and have those curb cuts go into those properties. There's we're starting to show amenities, the benches, trash receptacles, bike racks, those types of things that will all start to build towards this full, complete streetscape component. So, and then as we pull up to the roundabout area here, cars magically appear. There we go. Okay. So hopefully that gave you a little bit of a feel for what that would look like.
I have another quick question. You mentioned that the lanes would be 11 feet wide. Is that, you said that that's like the minimum that ODOT will allow, perhaps? Do we have restrictions on trucks and things coming down Main Street?
Not yet.
The big truck hit the bank.
I did know that.
This makes it, that curve better, by the way, because I'll curve quite a bit.
It pushes it out. The bump outs really help for that reason, right? It gives a little bit more protection to those buildings on the corner and pedestrians. It also, the other thing key that the bump outs do is it minimizes the distance that pedestrians are actually in the street, right? You know, we took out those lanes and took out 10 feet on either side, so now you're crossing 20 less feet of actual roadway pavement.
How many roads or main streets really are just 11-foot wide lanes? It doesn't sound very wide. Now, when I'm just thinking about cars parking, coming in and out and all that, it's taking away. Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
But it's actually got that. If you had a normal straight curve, but then you have a 11-foot lane, here, curve. We do really have 13 classified as.
What about storm drainage, not having the, how does that work?
The way it's graded is it's all gonna grade together. We've gone through, I see that. One way with all removal and stuff is to have it pushed up alongside the sidewalk.
Ask about roundabout street. What are the thoughts behind putting a roundabout there as a stop? An odd presentation for me because multiple times I've seen my house on it, and from my house I see lots of people every day walking across that intersection. So there's a lot of happening there, and I guess I typically relate roundabouts with more car oriented as opposed to pedestrian oriented, and I know that there was a large discussion, and council can remember this, about the potential roundabout that would have gone near the library. And that one was turned away because of concern about the number of kids, the number of people who cross there. And I wonder if that is thought of again. Just, I know a lot of families, when I love the idea of it being a quick way to kind of recover the path and try again, but then that also encourages more cars driving through the main. But I don't know. I guess
I think that the way they've identified the cross offers some.
I think it's definitely very clear. I think it's probably more of the idea of a roundabout. Cars aren't forced to stop and pause, and the idea as a roundabout is to car. It kind of naturally makes it, I think, a little bit more difficult to pause and aren't as easy. I'm not saying I'm on either side of this. I'm just bringing up some things for us to consider as we look at this, and I guess I hadn't thought of a roundabout.
Aaron?
One of the things, we've got, what, about 20? Are getting. One of the hardest is to try to navigate. So they are only looking.
Can you mark roundabouts with yield to pedestrians kind of sign?
Naturally yielded.
Bill, I'm gonna break my.
Sure.
Question about, looks like on the right-hand turn on, go west on Monroe Street, south on Main, extended to Q lane, why?
I think the key lane was probably based on your traffic analysis, right?
And I'm not sure if it was extended or.
It could be that too. We questioned that. We wondered if we, is it
Yeah.
possible that you, I think what we talked about is that is a hiccup. The traffic,
Yeah? Okay.
so your
That's-
answer is traffic.
Not sure that's necessarily a bad thing. Objective here is to have it more pedestrian friendly. We'll naturally avoid it if they're going to be backed up. Second, and this is more comment, members of council, one of the things that I heard, and I don't know whether other members of council heard it or not, last public concerns about the amount of heavy truck traffic coming down from Mission. And with the truck that recently hit the bank building, although I have no clue where that truck was coming or going, for local deliveries obviously need to happen, but this ended or thought process by creating the tables and the like, slow and eliminate trucks coming down from, have them go over to 23 South and that, anyways, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure, it helps that discussion. I think the overall, try to make, you can clearly see in all the. There's a trade-off that goes with that, having. Yeah.
Do we have the right as council to limit this to local delivery for trucks?
So again, I know we want to move on and stuff, but I just want to, like Kevin and I know if there's something here that we are off base on, or if we're on the right track too, because we want to know that we're on the right track. Want to know all that feedback before we march in January. Get everybody back.
We set that date?
We did not set that date, we
Okay.
just kind of penciled that last week.
Yeah, I was just looking through my calendar, I didn't see it. I was-
I mean, if brick, stick with the brick, don't go back and. Because the people on the second block are sensitive anyways to not being, you know, with the same thought process. The only other thing I would suggest, got lamp posts up, which are fine, but one of the things I've heard lots of comments about is the overhead lighting. First block is phenomenal. I don't know how you show that, Tim.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought that up because I forgot to mention that. So we have purposely, just for right now, said, like, let's focus on the ground plane of this. I think the intention is still, we've heard that, it's desirable, let's keep it up. We just didn't want to confuse the traffic pieces on the ground with that discussion of that piece overhead.
Whenever you do the meeting, you want to preface the whole.
Yep.
So many other cool things that we haven't touched on. And, you know, other.
Yep, yep. Okay. Great.
I really like narrowing up the lanes and gaining that in the sidewalks. Can't push the buildings back, but we can gain more sidewalk space. So I like what you're doing that way.
Great.
And ADA accessibility has to be high in my concerns as well, and not having the curb, but using the planter areas, even if they're gonna be 2 feet wide or something, Lindsay, allows most people to maneuver from the street onto the sidewalk much easier, which means the road and the sidewalks are gonna be raised up to get to the level of those buildings to eliminate the step.
Yeah, that's the next level that we're looking at.
The one thing we didn't talk about much is the alleyway that goes to the east mid-block. It goes past, comes out of the parking lot onto Main Street. That's in really dilapidated condition. Is that going to be part of this work? Privately owned, we'd have to have discussion. Well, there's discussion about whether it is or not. Oh, I don't buy coffee there, so I didn't know that. All right. Well, then it isn't going to look as nice as it did before. Then. Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Okay.
And it was privately paved then? Yes. Okay, well, they must really think they own it. And let them have it through adverse possession. Guys, it looks terrific. Thanks for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Have a Merry Christmas. Okay, Joe's not sitting down because he's got a lot of business here. Kevin is with family tonight, that's why he's not here. And Joe can step right in. So we're up to agenda item number 8, which is proposed ordinance 108-22. This talks about, this really isn't yours, Joe.
No, he's saying.
This is Mrs. Brining should bring us up to date on this one.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is just the annual contract with Lucas County to provide public defender services for indigent defendants, just for City of Sylvania indigent defendants. So last year, the total charge was $11,250. That's based on the total number of cases for the prior year. The proposed amount for next year is $12,300. That's based on the caseload they handled for us this year. They do a great job and I recommend its approval.
You've got the rates in here going back several years.
Yes.
We negotiated this down quite a bit a few
Yes.
years ago.
Yes, I think originally we were paying close to $50,000, and then we got
We questioned it.
yes, yeah, and then now it's uniform throughout the county. How they charge each of the municipal courts is based solely on their caseload for the city code charges.
Very good. Any questions for the law director on this one? If not, Mr. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to introduce ordinance number 108, 2022, and I will read by title only. Authorizing the mayor and director of finance to enter into an agreement on behalf of the city of Sylvania, Ohio, with the Board of Lucas County Commissioners for the provision of public defender services to the Sylvania Municipal Court for the year 2023. I move passage of ordinance number 108, 2022 as an emergency measure.
Second.
Been moved and seconded for passage of ordinance number 108, 2022 as an emergency measure. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries and ordinance 108, 2022 is enacted as an emergency measure. All right, back to Joe. We're up to agenda item 9, Monroe and Silica Improvement Project and the Silica Bridge.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 2017 is when we started this effort, so we are going to be in year 6 next year of Monroe and Silica. So a lot of hard work has been done all year acquiring the necessary right-of-way for the project. We've been to council many times this year, acquiring all of that. We are set. We're ready to go. We have federal authorization to proceed to advertise the project for sale. So in your council packet, there's a letter that outlines in the 3rd paragraph all of the dollars and cents, at least in the construction phase of this, and what we have coming to us to help us build this project. $5.3 million rounded up. So all the different funding mechanisms are in place for that, and we are ready to move forward to advertise the project for construction. Hopefully have that on the street first week of January.
Later in the agenda, we're going to talk about awarding the contract down at Maroon and Monroe, so they aren't both out at the same time. But it's, after the first of the year is always my favorite to go out to bid.
Mr. Mayor, I did have an inquiry today from Blade writer about, and I was able to tell him this is a great project, and gave A lot of credit to Kevin Aller and his team for the good work they've done in finding money to pay for this project.
Yeah, out of a
Hopefully that'll be reflected in the
I
newspaper
hope it,
article.
I hope it is too, because out of a $5 million project, only to be paying $217,000 locally, that's a real win. That's about 5%.
It's great work. And we appreciate it.
Joe puts his time in at T. McCog as chairman of the Transportation Committee, and this just kind of goes along with, he stays abreast of everything that's going on down there.
Sure.
All right. We do need a motion authorizing the clerk to advertise for bids for this project. Mr. Richardson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would move that the administration be authorized to advertise for bids for the Monroe Street and Silica Drive and the Silica Drive Bridge replacement projects.
Second.
Moved and seconded to authorize the clerk to bid, or advertise for bids. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Sure, Mr. Aller, let us know when that actual bid date is then.
We will do that for sure.
And he's still advertising the blade, so we can all read about it there too. Okay. Up to agenda item 10, Maroon Road pedestrian hybrid beacon. This is a final change order and it's a deduct.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yep, this is a deduct change order. We appreciate everyone's patience on this. I know it took a while to actually get this on the ground and running, but finally got our poles, and Toledo Edison cooperated with us and got us power to service it. So with that, all installed quantities are done. We have a slight deduct on this one of a little more than $3,000, $3,340.65. Project went very good. We had nothing out of the ordinary that came up on this. It's installed. Hopefully I've seen some people use it. We know it'll definitely get used more as we get into the warmer months next year. But yeah, good project, installed, ready to go, and a deduct on this one.
Great. Any questions? If not, Mr. Richardson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to read by title only ordinance number 109, 2022, authorizing the mayor and director of finance to approve change order number 1 final to the city's agreement with FET Construction Services LLC for the Haroon Road pedestrian hybrid beacon project to reflect final installed quantities, decreasing the contract amount by $3,340.65. I would move passage as an emergency measure.
Second.
Been moved and seconded for passage of ordinance number 109, 2022 as an emergency measure. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries, and ordinance 109, 2022 is enacted as an emergency measure. Moving on to agenda item 11, which is a residential street resurfacing project. Mr. Shaw.
Mr. Mayor, Tantalon Plat 1 and 2, for those that don't know where that's at, that's the first subdivision east of Centennial Farms. So streets like Thurwood, Thurfield, Shaftesbury, Marshwood, Peppermill, those types of streets. So advertised the project. We had 6 bids received, which for an asphalt resurfacing project is excellent. Our original low bidder was Henry W. Bergman out of Genoa. And they submitted a bid of $333,539.13. So they were well under our engineer's estimate, which is good. And with any project that we do in the city, we check references on their work and how they've done. A lot of our resurfacing work is done by Gherkin, so we hadn't seen anything from Henry W. Bergman in a while. We did check references on that, and we had hesitations on moving forward with them based on multiple other entities struggling mainly on the administrative side of projects, struggling to get final quantities in, struggling to get projects started, struggling to get projects done on schedule. Resurfacings, especially in our residentials, we try to focus on when school's out, and we don't want to be dealing with a contractor who's negligent on schedule and causing problems with bus routes. So we looked at the next low, which was Bowers Asphalt. They were only $3,000. I might have put that in here, how much more they were, but about $3,100 more than the low bid. Only the second time in my career I've ever not awarded it to a low. I don't like to get in the habit of doing that. It keeps contractors' pencils sharp. However, the reference check didn't go well on this, and we would recommend moving forward with the second contractor's bid of $336,721.84.
Like Mr. Shaw, I am always reluctant not to go to a low bidder. And I did have experience with Bergman Paving. It's a second-generation company being led by Paul Bergman now. He did a much smaller repaving project of an elementary school in the Washington local schools for me. He did fine, but I had to chase him around and make sure that things were working right. This is a larger scale project, and you did talk to him, you told me, and he
Conversation. He understands the difficulties that he's had. He acknowledges some of that through COVID, and they're trying to
does not
fix those
intend
things.
to contest being passed by.
Correct.
It's got to be very disheartening as a bidder to come in low, the expense of bidding a project, and then being low and not getting it. Sometimes they will be quite adamant about that, but apparently, if you've made the peace with them, I am satisfied with that. I've also had a lot of experience with Bowers Paving there out of Perrysburg. They've done larger projects with me, and I'm very comfortable with them. So I agree with Joe's recommendation on this one. We do have ordinance 110, 2022 to award this. Mr. Richardson, you can do it, or I can go to other members of your committee. Mr. McCann.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to introduce by title only ordinance number 110, 2022, accepting the bid of Bowers Asphalt and Paving, Inc., and awarding the contract for the Titillion Plant 1 and 2 resurfacing project to same, authorizing the expenditure for the improvements of the amount of $336,721.84, appropriating funds therefore. I move for passage of ordinance number 110-2022 as an emergency measure.
Second.
Been moved and seconded for passage of ordinance number 110, 2022 as an emergency measure. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries, and ordinance 110, 2022 is enacted as an emergency measure. I guess I should say that Bowers is also a second-generation company now. You know, I worked with their dads on projects, and they're about my age, maybe just a little older, but they've been pushed off to the side, okay? Or they've stepped to the side. And it's easier to work with the sons, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, they do a ton of the new developments. If you got new subdivisions going in all the townships, they pretty much are the asphalt contractor of choice. They do pretty much most of that work.
Barry Bowers was getting a little ornery. That's not on the record, is it? We just awarded the contract to his company. All right. On to agenda item 12, which is the Maroon and Monroe Safety Improvement Project rebid. Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So obviously we came to you guys in August with a permission to advertise for bids. We opened on the 4th. Those did not go super well based on our engineer's estimate. The low bid at that time was just under $2.3 million on a $1.7 million engineer's estimate. So went back to the table, looked at what was going on. Contractors' climate right now has a little bit to do with this one as well. So we revisited our engineer's estimate, revised that, and we did another advertisement with that. So on this one, we had 3 bids that were taken on December 13th. Different contractor was low in this one. It was Helms and Sons. Their bid was $2.15 million, which was still slightly over the engineer's estimate by about 1.5%, but I think our engineer's estimate this time around was a much better reflection of, I think, where the job actually sits to construct. So it did cost us a couple weeks in schedule, which is okay, but this rebid effort was lower than the original bid by about $138,000. So 3 to 4 weeks of buying time, but still saving $138,000 than what we had on the first go-around. Helms and Sons has done work for us before. They did the Main Street reconstruction project in 2018. They're doing ongoing work with Maplewood Avenue out front here by Inside the 5. I should say I know that project has taken a while, and it'll bleed into the spring for us to get all those items finished. None of that has been their fault. It's been vendor related. So I have complete confidence that they'll do a good job on this one as well.
What about the overrun on the budget here? How does that affect your overall budgeting of capital improvements projects?
We're in good shape with this one. Yeah, we were a little bit higher in terms of that. We did get a better number on the construction engineering side of this. But yeah, I think from a capital perspective, I think we're still in pretty good shape on this.
Any possibility of the state of Ohio helping us out with this?
Say that. They are going to help us out with this.
That's what I'd heard.
Yeah, we did a request and said we were a little over budget on what we were in the planning phases of this back in 18. Can we have take a look at the safety improvement program and see if there's any more additional money available? They did. They came back and said they'll give us another $375,000 to help with the cost of the project. So, in addition to the grant funding that we already had, another little short of $400,000 to help us out. So, does help offset the overrun a little
That is
bit.
very good. Thank you for that effort. All right, we do have proposed ordinance 111, 2022. Are there any questions for Mr. Shaw before we proceed on this? Back to you, Mr. McCann.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to introduce ordinance number 111-2022, accepting the bids of Helm Sons Excavating, awarding the contract for the Monroe Improvement Project, authorizing the expenditure for the improvements in the amount of $2,150,701.10, appropriating funds therefore. I move passage of ordinance number 111-2022 as an emergency measure.
Second.
Been moved and seconded for passage of ordinance number 111, 2022 as an emergency measure. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries, and ordinance 111, 2022 is enacted as an emergency measure. Thank you for your efforts this evening. Okay, we are to page 2 of our agenda. We're up to agenda item 13, proposed ordinance 112, 2022. This is to make certain adjustments to our account allocations for the fiscal year. This is an annual item, but let's let Mr. Schroyer tell us about it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is our annual end of the year.
Any questions? And I think you're all aware of the fact, I don't know whether Toby just said it, there is a double billing in the year because of Lucas County 9/11 services. He's absorbed it elsewhere. We still didn't allocate more funds. Way to go. All right then, we have ordinance 112, 2022. Mr. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to introduce ordinance number 112, 2022, and read by title only. To make certain adjustments to account allocations within the fund appropriations for the fiscal year ending December 31, 2022, I move passage of ordinance number 112, 2022 as an emergency measure.
Second.
Been moved and seconded for passage of ordinance number 112, 2022 as an emergency measure. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries, and ordinance 112, 2022 is enacted as an emergency measure.
Mr. Mayor.
Before we move on, I have a clarification.
Yes, sir.
The municipal court, $200,000 less than budgeted? Okay, and, that's great. And the reasons for that are? Yeah.
I don't think that's still going to show a similar deficit.
That's great. I mean, obviously,
Had to think about that. But what you just said, Toby, is income must be down as well because there's still as big a deficit in operating the court as before.
that's what I was trying to, that reflect, I saw the lower expenditure number. Is the lower revenue number in?
Revenue would not be.
Got it. Okay. Got it. Okay. I'd appreciate that.
Mr. McCann?
Yes, sure. The move forward payment for 2023 be reflected in 2022, which we just passed. Will that occur again next year?
Talking about the
Yes.
there will be one.
Okay, so for the,
We are paying a year ahead, but this
Yes.
is the only year we double up on it.
yeah, that was the clarification. Thank you.
Okay. I'd also like to point out that you all know that our audit went fine for the 2021 books. We were awarded a certificate on the audit and on our finances by the Auditor of State. And if you haven't seen it, it is now hanging up in the finance office on the wall underneath the other one that we received a few years ago. We were eligible this because of the resolution of the transfer of capital funds that we got faulted on a few years ago. We are back in their good graces. Mrs. Booker is very proud of that certificate. Okay. Up to agenda item 14. This is another end-of-year ordinance for wages. Mr. Schreier. Mr. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One thing that, I've been on council for 8 years now, that I think, given the circumstances of what we've seen, with our administrative staff, our non-union staff, I don't recall ever having done an actual salary evaluation of our staff. I think that may be something that we may want to consider, given the current rate of inflation. We've done a great job in holding and controlling our costs, but it may be beneficial to do an evaluation of where our pay scales are at relative to other communities, Northwest Ohio and elsewhere.
Mr. Schreier has conducted those on a smaller scale, and we have controlled those. We rolled them back quite a bit from where they were when Mr. Schreier came on board. But a larger scale study is probably in order at this time. I've talked to Mr. Schreier about it, and we'll talk more about where to go and how to get that done.
Great,
But I think that's in order to protect everybody around this table.
right. Thanks.
All right. Any other questions? Okay, we do have ordinance 113, 2012, and Mrs. Westfall, this is yours if your voice is ready for it.
At the
It's a
old
long
college try. If I lose it halfway through, somebody can pick it up.
I got your back,
I'd like
Mary.
to introduce ordinance number 113-2022. All members having received an advance, I'll read by title only. Making certain position and compensation pay plan changes, making certain salary, wage, and other service compensation adjustments to the codified ordinances of Sylvania, 1979 as amended, and other ordinances by granting pay increases to the appointed officials whose titles are listed in section 139.03E3, by granting a 3% pay increase to all non-union city employees and court employees whose positions are included in the list of occupational titles of section 139.02A of the codified ordinances of Sylvania, which increase is reflected in the annual wage rate schedule 4 of section 139.10D of the Sylvania codified ordinances by granting pay increases for some of the employees in the labor and trade supervision. I move final passage of ordinance number 113-2022 as an emergency measure.
Moved and seconded for passage of ordinance number 113, 2022 as an emergency measure. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries, and ordinance 113, 2022 is enacted as an emergency measure. And we will be back to you with a proposal for discussion how to get this study underway.
Super.
We are now up to agenda item 15, which is some city council appointments that came out of the Employee and Community Relations Committee meeting held on December 6th. Report from Mrs. Westfall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, there was a Employee and Community Relations Committee meeting on December 6th to discuss several appointments. Present at the meeting were myself as chair, Marcus Hanson, Doug Hanem, Patrick Richardson, all committee members. Also joining us, Mark Fry and Brian McCann. So we were looking at 3 positions that were open. One is the BZA, the Board of Zoning and Appeals seat. Matthew Snell has served on that board for 1 term, and he was interested in serving a 2nd term. And we have left room for that in previous times. He was feeling like he was just getting his feet wet, really starting to understand the BZA and its role. And he comes highly credentialed. He lives in Sylvania, of course. He's a civil engineer and currently works for ODOT. He has a very extensive background in roads, railroads, bridges, and various things. He has a bachelor's degree in both civil and mechanical engineering and a master's degree in civil engineering. And he's licensed as an engineer in Ohio and Michigan, so he brings a lot to the table. So Patrick Richardson moved, and and Marcus Hanson seconded that we appoint Mr. Snell to the BZA for another term, and that motion did pass. And the motion was actually make a recommendation to administration that we advance Matthew Snell. From there, we went on to discuss there's an open seat on Sajard. George France is retiring from his role, so we had advertised for that. We had 2 candidates who stepped up, both of whom were very strong, George Hilfinger and Mary Morrison. George, I left his resume in the car, I'm so sorry to say, but he comes with a lot of experience in the community. He really is interested in serving in the community. He's been involved in some of the Sajard programming with his children and with himself, and he presented very well. And of course, Mary Morrison, who we all know from TARTA, fabulous in every way, very strong candidate. And the group had quite a discussion, and based on George's presentation and his interest in giving back, felt this was appropriate to appoint George Hilfinger to the position. So Doug Hanem moved and Patrick Richardson seconded that we appoint George to the Sajard board. And so the recommendation to administration is that we advance that recommendation. And then finally, there is an open seat for the position for Sylvania City Council. We have a 1-year seat each year on Sajard, and so currently I serve in that seat. So we had a discussion about continuing that role. Again, I've only been there for 1 year and felt that it was appropriate to stay in that position a little longer. There's some big issues before Sajard, and for some consistency's sake, and fortunately, the group supported that. So Doug Hanem moved and Patrick Richardson seconded that we move forward and make the recommendation to administration that I continue in that seat. And with no other business to come before the committee, then move to adjourn at 6. So I have 3 people that were forward. Administration was kind enough to advance some legislation that was included.
Thank you. Any questions for Mrs. Westfall? You mentioned Mary Morrison's name that you interviewed as well. Thursday night, Morrison reported to me that she has been elected president of the TARTA board. So that's quite a step forward. I know that Sylvania's had the chairman of finance committees, but I'm not sure I ever remember the presidency of the board coming to Sylvania. And it's unusual for it to leave Toledo, to tell you the truth. That's quite a great step forward. Shows what a great job she must be doing down there. Her CEO of TARTA, Laura Kaprowski, also confirmed that with me when she arrived on Thursday night as well. So that's terrific. We do have 3 resolutions here. We're very fortunate that Mrs. Westfall is volunteering to serve on the Sajard Board of Go. And consistency is very important there, and reports are that she is doing a great job. So we do have Resolution 20, 2022 to reappoint Mrs. Westfall. Mr. Fry.
I'd like to introduce resolution number 2022, and read by title only. Reappointing Mary Westfall to the Board of Trustees of Sylvania Area Joint Recreation District, Sageyard. She being a member of the council of this appointing political subdivision for the full calendar year of 2023. I move passage of resolution number 2022 as an emergency measure. Second.
Been moved and seconded for passage of resolution number 20, 2022 as an emergency measure. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries, and resolution 20, 2022 is enacted as an emergency measure. Congratulations, Mrs. Westfall. Now, we'll move on to agenda item 15C, which is appointing Mr. Hilfinger to the board, and this is for a 3-year term. Those three-year terms are staggered every 3 years. We have resolution 21, 2022. Mrs. Westfall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to introduce resolution number 21-2022. All members having received copies, I'll read by title only. Appointing George Hilfinger to the Board of Trustees of Sylvania Area Joint Recreation District for a term expiring December 31st, 2025. I move final passage of resolution number 21-2022 as an emergency measure.
Second.
Moved and seconded for passage of resolution number 21, 2022 as an emergency measure. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries, and resolution 21, 2022 is enacted as an emergency measure. On to 15D, proposed resolution 22, 2022. This is to reappoint Matthew Snell to the Zoning Board of Appeals for a term ending December 31st, 2025. Mr. Haynem, I thought I'd go to this one for you since you are a zoning chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Move adoption of resolution number 2022. I will read by title only. Reappointing Matthew J. Snell to the Zoning Board of Appeals for a term expiring December 31, 2025. And I move adoption of resolution number 22-2022 as an emergency.
Second.
Been moved and seconded for passage of resolution 22, 2022 as an emergency measure. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries, and resolution 22-2022 is enacted as an emergency measure. On to agenda items 16 and 17. Are there any committee reports or committee referrals to make at this time? The information items are fairly brief this meeting. There are the meeting minutes of the Board of Architecture Review and the very brief meeting minutes of the Planning Commission, which didn't have any business. Before we adjourn, I'd like to discuss the yellow note that was in your council packets. We discussed this a few meetings ago with the change of clerks, council clerks, and an initiative that we would like to start. We are proposing to email everyone out the council packets on Friday afternoon. Everything will be in there as a package. If you'd like a printed copy of it Friday, we'll have it available for you to pick up. Or if you'd like a printed copy of it sometime Monday, either during the day or at council chambers, we will bring those as well. If you're not interested in having it all, we won't send the paper. You can let the new clerk know what you would like to do. Laura will take notes and do whatever you request.
Absolutely.
The mayor is getting a printed copy because I'm old-fashioned and I need to refer to the agenda and the ordinances separately. So don't be embarrassed if you want a printed copy. I'm not.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. McCann.
question. Would there be any chance of getting the packets earlier if they're electronic?
Right now, it takes probably till 2 o'clock or sometimes a little later to do it.
Electronic, I could get it to earlier. By 2 o'clock, Mayor, is when we're putting them together physically.
That would be an average time, maybe a little bit sooner, but I want to caution you to not always expect that. If we have an ordinance that's late or something that's outstanding, it may
Yeah.
not come.
That's understood.
We try to do it as early as we can, and typically Sharon wanted to distribute those packets starting but about 2, but sometimes there's a delay.
Well, I understand that, and there's legislation on our desk when we get here, so that we understand that too. But any earlier would be better also, if that's possible.
I think
Thank
you
you.
will get it quicker if we email the packet to you, and you were waiting for it to be delivered.
The advantage is we can print it on Friday after.
You sure can.
Yeah. As getting it earlier on Friday is better than later on.
You don't have to wait until you get home.
Well, I don't print at home generally,
Right? I mean, you don't have to wait to see it until you get home when
Right.
we were delivering you one.
but then I have it printed. I would probably won't look at it until Saturday anyway.
Okay. All right. So let Mrs. Bigelow know what your preference would be. With that, we are out of agenda items. This is our last meeting of 2022. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Mr. Richardson? Good question. Let's table it and hopefully come back. Mr. Sanford, any update?
Yes. My director coach apologized.
All right, our next meeting is Tuesday, January 3rd, 2023.
Motion to table agenda item number 6.
Second.
Today's
Moved and tabled to table item 6 until our next meeting on January 3rd. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Richardson. With that, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to adjourn. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned for 2022, and we'll reconvene 15 days from now on Tuesday, January 3rd of 2023 at 7:30 PM in these council chambers. Thank you all for a wonderful year.